Thank you. Thank you, Dylan, for firing things up here. We are running a little bit late. We're working through some technical difficulties, as is, things have changed on Teams, things have moved around, but we're getting things sorted out. So I appreciate everyone's patience as we use the Teams webinar function. This is the M365 Council. We're doing a fireside chat, CIO fireside chat with Treasury Board today, TBS. This is a sort of a follow-up or an add-on to the in-person presentation that we had on the 15th with TBS at the Microsoft office. So there should be some continuity to the content. And for those that weren't able to join us in person, this is a great opportunity to hear what TBS has to share, and also share in some of the lessons learned and join in on the discussion. So of course, the council is hosted by Orangutech. Who is Orangutech? Orangutech is a Microsoft Solutions partner for modern work. We work very closely with Government of Canada. We've been facilitating this council for many years now. We are involved in our community. We give back where we can. I would also like to highlight DPI there on the right. Today we have Sylvain Blanger joining us to speak. Sylvain is also the president of DPI. So we make sure that we work closely with organizations that are giving back to the community and making sure that we are aligned and give back to Government of Canada as well. So so happy to have him join us there today, and looking forward to the DPI's conference in May. It's coming very quickly. So our mission for the council is to create a community for our members to share Microsoft 365 challenges, successes, insights, and next steps among public sector departments. So really trying to facilitate that discussion. We feel that every department's been on its own journey, and it's important to share the lessons learned and how we got here. A little bit about our most recent events. In September, we had our M365 Council Showcase in person. And on February 15th, we also had an in-person fireside chat with TBS. Like I said, this is a follow-up continuity from that event. It was very well attended at the Microsoft office. We had a great time. And we're really trying to come up with new ways to facilitate a community in person and virtual as well. So the next council meeting that we're looking at, we're targeting a spring and fall in-person meetings. For any invites or more information, please contact Dylan. His email's right there. He's worked really closely with TBS to put not only the in-person event together, but today's seminar together as well. So if you have any questions, there's a Q&A, and please fire questions into the Q&A. We'll sort of do an agile Q&A today. We have multiple presentations from multiple parties at TBS. We'll do an agile Q&A. We'll pop some questions in between presentations. If we have time at the end, we'll go over some of the bigger questions, but please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A, and please give a thumbs up or vote for the questions that you want to see answered. There will be a lot of discussion, and we might have to prioritize certain questions, so please do that. If you have a question that we didn't get to, or you want to suggest topics for future meetings, please reach out to Orangutech or us on LinkedIn, and we can continue the conversation there. So without further ado, I'd like to throw over to Sylvain Blanger, CIO at TBS, and Danielle Morneau, Senior Director at TBS, to share TBS's cloud journey and the lessons learned on their cloud journey as well. So thank you. Sylvain, Danielle, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you, Eric. I'll just take a few minutes to talk about TBS's cloud journey, and then I'll turn it over to Danielle and the team, because really the important piece today is to hear about our journey through to SharePoint and our lessons learned, the successes, what we could have done differently, and how our lessons can really help you. So I'm Sylvain Blanger. I'm the CIO at the Treasury Board Secretariat, as Eric mentioned, also the president of DPI. So enterprise passes, register for the virtual or in-person sessions for the conference in May. So TBS has started its cloud journey many years ago. We can go to the next slide. And just to give you an understanding, really the work started in 2015, and you'll see the evolution. What we've done for you today, because it's a compressed session from what we did in person at the Microsoft offices, is I'll go quickly through the cloud journey, and then our team will go through the lessons learned. But you'll get a lot more information from us. We'll send all the slides, and the slides will be much more detailed in terms of our cloud journey. But the important thing here is the work on our cloud journey really impacted the way that we could do our SharePoint transition away from GC Docs. Just to appreciate our cloud environment, TBS is fully cloud. We can go to the next slide, and we'll just give you a quick appreciation of GC Docs is one of 165 applications in our tenants. We host everything in the cloud. We manage almost every component that we have. And so this is just a quick stat to give you a sense of what that means. But really, the important thing is that we were able to be flexible with that because both our cloud, our M365, and our SharePoint, as you'll see, I'll show the links between those three pieces. So we can go to the next one. It's really about showing about our the components of our cloud and the principles. For us, it truly is about cost optimization, operational excellence, performance efficiency, reliability, and security. And each of those components, we have teams that are dedicated to working on those. Cost optimization, we are doing FinOps constantly. We have a team that's dedicated to that. So I'll show you a bit of what our costs look like in a minute or two. We hear the concerns about cloud costs and being out of control. We really have been able to optimize that for the TBS environment. We run in Azure from end to end with all our pieces, and we've really been able to make sure that we have full control. We optimize the components that need to. We throttle down the pieces that should be at different times during the day as well to reduce our cloud costs. All those components are really part of the backbone that have made our SharePoint journey successful. So if we go to the next slide, you can start seeing the links between how we've linked our cloud pieces with our SharePoint. With M365, the intuitive, collaborative, any device, accessibility, and fully integrated. Our SharePoint environment, you can use it on your phone, you can use it on your tablets. It's all the same components. We talk about collaboration, which provides simultaneous editing features. We've used that in other departments, but now our clients across TBS are really seeing the impact of having the collections within SharePoint, being able to manage them. The user experience is so much different than using our previous solutions, and how that integrates across all our different activities, the work that we do, and being able to have a more digital workplace and workspace for our clients. If we go to the next one, it's really about maximizing the service and capabilities. For IMTD, as part of our work on the cloud, the security services, you can see all of the components that we make sure we have in place and that support and protect our environments. All of the Defender components, the desktop security, and we have very good oversight because of the way our platform is organized into the day-to-day activities across all our devices, everybody's phone or tablet. If we have security issues, we are able to lock down quickly and secure. That also, I'll skip over the information management for a second, but that also goes to the infrastructure and the up-to-date conditions that we have so that we're able to maintain a stable environment with very little downtime, if at all. And that's because we manage this with conditional access, Intune, Exchange Online, Azure AD, the Office suites, and the Azure virtual desktops. And then identity, the whole department is going to MFA, and we've applied a lot of conditional privileges, and really from a security perspective, we're always trying to push our clients across the departments from a security perspective. I'll go back to information management. Information management for our clients. It's OneDrive, SharePoint Online. We do a lot of data loss prevention work across the department. So the work with SharePoint Online, the IM team, our AT security teams, this is integrated together. Data loss prevention is a big component, and you'll hear more about that, as well as advanced e-discovery, which can support your department for access to information. It's not as easy as it sounds. It's a very powerful tool, so making sure you find the right balance for that. And then, of course, with SharePoint Online, it to a certain extent, it's helping us with how many litigation holes does each of our departments have nowadays. And then, of course, information management. How do you organize the information and manage the controls in your team's environments? Departments are different, whether they provide an environment where you can have teams and groups, or else it's very centralized and controlled. It varies by department, but we can share some of the experience we've had. If we go to the other one, the next slide. I'll just show it quickly, but it's really about utilizing all the tools that we had available to us in the cloud to support us across the platform. And a lot of those pieces are supporting us in terms of our IM journey. And details will be provided, and the slides, as I said, will be provided to you. But I wanted to speak quickly about the costing for managing the cloud in those environments. We can go to the next one, please. We really have a focus on ensuring we have good visibility, accountability over all of the components of our cloud, and optimizing and the efficiency. So each time we ramp up a new environment, as we're bringing in new tools and new solutions in place for our clients, they are managed within our overall Azure environment as their own environment, so that we can make sure, but within the bigger picture of our security. And as I said before, from a cost perspective, we look at which solutions need to be run 24/7, which ones we can throttle at different points, and at what point within this Azure environment does it need to sit, so that we can maximize the costs. And the costs, you'll see if you go to the next slide, are really from if you have a good control over your financials, like we do with FinOps. As we ramped up and we went into COVID, you can see we hit 5.2 million a year in terms of cloud costs, but that's been diminishing since. So, and we've been diminishing our cloud costs from 5.2 million to 3.5 million in 22-23. What you see above that, the bar that's aiming almost at 20,000, is the fact that we've gone from 14,000 applications on the cloud, we've hit almost 20,000, and our costs have been going down at the same time, which means we've become more and more efficient in terms of how we manage that environment, and it makes it even better in terms of how we're going to be able to support our overall journey, both from the IM perspective, but overall client perspective. And quickly, just the last two slides, because I really want to, I'm using up almost 10 minutes. I really want you to hear about the lessons learned, because this is where you'll get a lot of value. The next two are really showing you and you'll see the links after, but this is the components that link really well with our IM journey with SharePoint. We're going away from having visibility issues and loss of control. We're now working really hard in terms of data loss. It's the opposite of that. Now we have a very good overview of all that. It's improved our system efficiencies. We're reducing our costs in terms of RGC docs licenses. We're using the systems that we were already paying for, and we're maximizing their use. Our clients are now aligning more with the compliance and understanding the challenges of being a government department and managing those assets. So our cloud journey isn't finished. We'll go to the last slide. This is really giving you an understanding of where we're at. The green is the bright side of the moon. The darker ones are the dark side that we're working on. So it shows you our evolution. It's continual. We're still doing a lot of migration to cloud native platforms. We're working on zero trust adoption, which is coming up over the next year. Some of them are actually the password hash sync, which looked like his dark side of the moon is actually almost fully green now. We're just finishing that with TBS. Actually, we are finalizing some of that this morning, and we're looking at what Microsoft Copilot capabilities will be for us in the future. For that, we're really focusing on the governance and how to support that as an organization before we jump all in just with the technological solutions. Quick overview. This is the foundation for what you'll hear next about our SharePoint journey and lessons learned, which is really the meat of the discussion today. I'll turn it over to Danielle. I don't know if you want to hit a couple of questions or I can come back later for those. So I'm open either way.
The question that came up is basically my first slide, Sylvain. So I think that'll be good. So I think I'll be able to answer that one. But so Danielle Morneau, thank you so much today for letting us come and chat with you about this. It was an important mission that we talked about over the life of this project to make sure that we communicated and shared across the community. We're all playing in M365 and there's some real value in sharing these lessons. It's also a fantastic opportunity among our peers to recognize the incredible work of our IM team and their colleagues in terms of making this happen. It was a Herculean effort. And so a lot of the people you're going to see talking to today, I'd love to say it was a fraction of the team, but it really is the bulk of the people that were involved in doing it. And, the first iteration of this deck was quite disturbing, actually. It's like when you're doing a DIY project at home, like you can't help but look back and only see the mistakes. But there was so much good in this, and I hope we give you a balanced view of the things that we did that we'll never get credit for. In IT, they rarely ever give you credit for the disastrous things that you completely avoided. And some of the things that didn't go quite so well, quite humbly and honestly, because we'd like to help you avoid those. So to one of the questions out there, this was not a tandem system. We purchased an E5 license in Microsoft 365, as well as additional capability through Sentinel and some other components to really open the door to have the conversation on could SharePoint replace our existing official repository for electronic documents. And we worked very closely with OCIO in terms of the existing policies and things like that and reshaped those as Is everyone seeing my deck or no? I just saw someone with a comment. Okay, so I think it's up there, but I'm not sure how to help. It's funny that M365 is failing us today, ironically, in a few ways, but thanks for everyone for their patience. So we are a small department, about 2,800 people. We are a collaborating department, or that was certainly the assumption that we make, and we'll show you the data that proves out that assumption was correct. These decisions were made prior to my arrival, but we can keep GC Docs and the value that it brings, and I won't say that it doesn't bring value, and we can add middleware for the two to communicate, but we'd like the capability that comes from SharePoint and Teams to be integrated. So the decision was made that we would look at ways to replace it. So that is what we've done. We're looking at our migration, how we've moved to GC Docs onboard to SharePoint. We are maintaining GC Docs managed service, as well as physical record management litigation holds until they're not required. And it is not the same as GC Exchange. So GC Exchange is a different system that was designed. This is Treasury Board's tenant for our employees within the department. So, we have lots of benefits that we outlined that we're going to be. Should I try and unshare and reshare the deck? You can't hold me accountable for my time loss here, Dylan. I'd like to make sure I can present everything. I'll unshare and then reshare?
Yeah, I think so. Give it a shot.
Not that all of you wouldn't appreciate my lovely face. We will share the deck if anyone missed anything.
And just to reiterate, Danielle, before we hop back in, anyone who can't see the deck or see Danielle or having an error, please log back off, come back in. That's fixing it for some people. So just give that a try as well.
Perfect. And thanks, everyone. I do, yeah, hopefully everyone's experience is good. If not, complete English and French decks will be provided to everyone. We are just holding off to make sure the 2 sessions have been held before sharing them with everyone. They've all been translated. They're ready to rock and roll, latest Monday. So if you missed something, I apologize, but we will get it out. So just in terms of, I think I was here, we made the assumption it would be a great collaboration tool. We were right. And we really kind of wanted to rethink completely about how we were doing information management. We wanted to create a better user experience. So these were some of the things, and we're sharing them with you as you look at your own journeys in terms of what we were trying to do and why we did it. But really, what was most important to us was really changing the way that we looked at records management. In a historical or traditional information management view, you kind of start with the governance. This is how things need to be done. We would put a rigid structure in place and expect users to conform to it. But we've kind of flipped that on its head. The foundation is, how do users want to work? What's the structure, the minimal amount of structure that will allow us to get what we need to support the governance? And then through creating that experience, solid adoption will drive IAM compliance. And through, we don't need to police anymore. You like the way it was in GC Docs? Cool, we can set it up that way for you. You liked how you're doing it in Teams? Not a problem, let's do it that way. And we're having all of those engagements now on an ongoing basis. And once people are solid and comfortable in it, we're really seeing them be like, this is cool. At the back end, we can see all of everyone's behaviors and files and documents, and it's a lot easier for us. Megan and company will get into that a little bit more when they talk about e-discovery, but there's still a lot of opportunity in here to keep driving solid user experience. So one of the things I heard a lot was, wow, you guys got this done, so quickly. And part of it was we had our heads down for a long time trying to make this happen. It wasn't an overnight journey. A lot of things were thrown at us, but we were very, very, very laser beam focused. We had broken it down into about 3 big components. We used the model in part recommended by Microsoft, like me, we, and us. The team will go into a little bit more of our roadmap strategy, but they were centered around OneDrive, Teams, and SharePoint. And you'll see there's a massive lull as we made sure that we were trying to get our AA right, and then we had another big lull while we were trying to get our migration work done. And that comes back and becomes very important in terms of what went wrong. So, we did all of this in the backdrop of COVID and waiting for some cloud components to be in place and things like that. And for all of you, we had made all of these plans and assumptions with a very stable O365. But all of those things and the complexity in our team were challenged with not only, putting something in ops and then having to manage it afterwards, as well as plan and build the next component that was coming in an agile way. It was also faced with the idea that Microsoft was changing and adding things at now an accelerated pace, where we used to see like a 6-month major release through Microsoft, the big Seattle thing, daily, weekly, monthly, they were changing the game on us, renaming things, rebranding them. Like it was, whew. So, I think one of the tools has changed 3 names since we started. So just kind of when you think and when you hear Graham talk later, at one point he was the only one who was managing the higher level calls on these things, helping the Azure team, also trying to give me what's next in the roadmap, and then also trying to assess what was coming through the pipe through Microsoft, that was what was going to hurt us most the quickest. So when I say our user roadmap for G SharePoint, it was very contained. It wasn't, we're going to get trainable classifiers out of the gate, and we're going to, it was, we want a fully configured spaces and permissions and navigation. We want spaces completely populated with the migration of our existing records, and we limit it to GC Docs. SharePoints have been roadmap for this year. And we didn't have RDIMS was within our GC docs. Like our old RDIMS libraries were in GC docs, so that was two big libraries that we'd be moving at once. We stopped using personal drives when we introduced OneDrive, and they haven't been introduced, so we had already done that migration prior. We wanted all the IAM obligations fully met, any of the holds, all the labeling implemented. We're still kind of shoring up some of that. And then all of our IAM operations will be ready and available. They are certainly not mature, but ready and available that we could do basic searches and things. So when you look at the roadmap for SharePoint, you've got, the enterprise terms and metadata, we're starting to get into that space. And so we still have quite a lot of runway before, but this was the project, centralized information. Sorry. So I talked a little bit about some of the challenges and pressures, certainly from the team. We weren't resourced effectively enough for this. The team got stretched way too thin. And despite trying to bring in more resources, there was limited knowledge of this product within the GC community. And it was changing faster than, so we really just had to find really solid, capable, des personnes polyvalentes, very, very able to be dynamic. And I think we've got a great team in place now, but I would have loved to have them in place 2 years ago. We had a good number of IT folks in place, but we still would have needed more. We underestimated how much users had really blown it in GC docs. The permissions, it's the iceberg. Like we had 7 layers, that was our structure, but clients had created another iceberg underneath it, and something 20 layers down could have created a security concern when those permissions were inherited. So the team's going to talk about that a little bit more, but that led to significant remediation work. People weren't taking the time to reorg their files properly as they reorged. And so those 2 things kind of really, in terms of getting a great outcome, those were the most impacted. And if you look at the project budget for this, if you guys are working in M365, you'll notice that that wasn't a lot of money. So we did it on a bit of a shoestring. All of that said, it was successful. We have to keep reminding ourselves, 90% of all of our documents were in place on day 1 on launch day, and we've met as 100% as of February 2024 this year. This migration was done with 0 blackout time. SharePoint or GC Docs has remained available to users in read-only for the entire year. It's allowed us to support good and really solid QA work. It's meant we can help and take the time with users. We have 0 loss of data, and any, so we're striving for 31 March to have all that work done, and we should be good. So that's some of the work that's still ongoing. The spaces were fully configured with permissions, and yes, so those are the other things. I already said those, so I'm not going to repeat myself. But some stuff is still going to happen, optimizing the user experience, refining that new information architecture. I mean, people are in it, they're getting comfortable, and they're like, hey, could we do this? And we're like, sounds great. Yeah, we could. Let's have that conversation. And we don't want to throw out all of the amazing work that this department did when they did their GC Docs establishment. We were very committed to GC Docs, and we were 100% users. And so all the disposition and retention information, we want to make sure that we set it up as well in our SharePoint. Sorry, I see questions popping up and I want to answer them right away. So just bear with me. We will get to all of them at the end there. So like I said, the proof is in the pudding. First of all, M365 is fantastic. SharePoint and most of the other M365 components give you these beautiful data. It's sometimes you're not always clear on exactly what it's trying to tell you, but we are getting benchmarks and other information. So you'll see at the bottom file storage, one of the trends that we're observing right now is sort of net file changes in OneDrive. And you'll see over the course of the period, it's remained relatively stable, whereas we've seen massive net file changes in SharePoint. So you're seeing that adoption really happen. And the most exciting one that we're watching and observing, and what the right mix is, I'm not sure, is the sharing activities like OneDrive and SharePoint. So, you know, at the beginning of the fiscal year, you were seeing quite a lot more sharing from OneDrive, that darker blue, where SharePoint was a smaller portion, and now you're seeing the links that are being shared in the department really taking a 50-50 kind of view. Is that appropriate? Is not? You know, I think time will tell, but we knew we wanted it to go into that trend. So here's another few. I mean, M365 provides sort of a view of collaboration, teamwork, and some preferred behaviors in these spaces, and allows it to benchmark against peer organizations. They do the same in the IT security and other areas. But right off the bat, you know, we're scoring, you know, a B minus in terms of our collaboration and content collaboration. You know, people sharing document files, physical files versus sharing online files. So we're doing better. We also want to then observe what is driving people, you know, attaching physical files versus online files. Perhaps half of the participants in their emails are actually external to the department. So that might be a big thing that's driving it. We're also seeing, you know, I'd say a failing mark on teamwork, but still above our peers in terms of how many people are in shared workspaces during the activity 4 days or more, or no engagement whatsoever. Now, is that a bad thing? I'm not sure. I think over time we're going to have to explore these and kind of figure out what they mean. But it's data we've never seen before in terms of employee behavior in IM systems, in terms of how they collaborate, share documents, et cetera. That's quite insightful and will help drive some of our future road mapping. So in terms of lessons, I have about 8 slides, each one of these very detailed, and we'll be sharing all of those with you. But there's a kind of 3 main lessons I want to leave with you around these 7, or I can summarize them because they're interrelated. And I have notes for this because I want to get it right. You know, I want to hone in on the resourcing, user engagement, and scoping project planning assumptions. From a resourcing perspective, you know, our number 1 recommendation is to ensure that you know, resources are, you know, protected from operational demands once the functionality of M365 really comes online. It's critical. We were learning as we're going, and at times we're expecting too much from our technical resources, both putting out the fires for the existing tools and then planning and configuring for the new solutions that were coming through. But don't completely isolate them from operations, because, you know, but about 80% of their time should be dedicated towards the future-oriented work, because that capacity was further eroded, as I mentioned, just through Microsoft and its global adoption approach. Not only that, clients then want stuff turned on, want stuff turned off. You know, there is so much that happens in that space. I'm sure some of you have experienced this. User engagement. We started so strong, and the team's going to tell you about how wonderful our design work went. From the outset, we had multiple engagements. But the minute we started to experience delays with our migration work, we just didn't stay in contact because it kind of felt like it's coming. Like we didn't want to, almost we got a little bit afraid to engage because we didn't want to be criticized, or whatever was driving that kind of behavior of we'll get there. What it ended up doing in one respect was that, you know, we didn't stay engaged with them and therefore didn't recognize that some of them have changed, but also we actually needed to morph from those original ideation folks to the future content owners, and then start onboarding the content owners. And so the content owners being in place and up to speed and kind of along for the tail end of the journey for us would have been fantastic. But we had this naive, I'll call it naive, approach to wanting to kind of white glove things. I call it the implementation approach, but we wanted to like unburden users. And so what that meant was like, we were like, we're going to pathfind into this, and we're going to set up camp for you, and then we're going to airlift you in. And they got there and they're like, this is cool, and I like the tent, but there is no sleeping bag for me. And you forgot the food at home. So they were pretty patient with us for the first part. And then we would have saved ourselves a lot of heartache if those sector-based or in our branches, those content owners had been in place and could have helped us through some of that tail end pieces. So we kind of, it double backfired on us. And I would take a do-over on this. If I could do over one thing, it would be this. And I would have prioritized content owner training over mandatory training, which we did put in place for the department. So users were ready, but the people to support them, or our middle layer that we could have relied on, weren't there. And then finally, I talked about our mapping and things like that, and the double iceberg that we faced in SharePoint or in GC Docs. Sorry, like really know your from to. If it doesn't matter if you're coming from RDIMS, shared drives, etc. Like dig down deep. Really understand those user behaviors and what things they may have done. Pay particular attention to like admin files, where there's a mix of things in them, and kind of get those content owners in place and then ask them to help you clean it up. It doesn't matter if you're trying to move to GC Docs at the moment or get more people onboarded. I think this is a universally, the from to was a little bit more complex than we had originally anticipated, and some of our mapping work failed as a result. Our migration tool really just did the heavy lifting to make sure that we didn't lose anything and that we had, we were moving a real copy, and that we could stand behind it from a litigation and ATIP perspective. But we relied on manual mapping, and that was potentially somewhere where we could have done a better job. So these are the detailed lessons learned for each one of these. So hopefully those will come to your aid and you can take with them and glean from them what you would like when we share the debt with you. We have applied our lessons already. We recently migrated mailboxes and data from the Canadian Digital Service within OCIO to ESDC. We have also been mapping and migrating information from the IFMS team from PSPC to TBS. And now we are starting to look at our migration of shared drives once we get through the bulk of GC Docs. And starting to test e-discovery and that functionality. It is very powerful. And I think it continuously surprises us with just how effective it is. And so like using any of the modern tools that are just so good at bringing back large bits of data, we need to learn prompting, how to ask the queries properly, how to do keyword searches properly. And so it's quite an exciting time, but again, making sure it's resourced effectively and things like that. That said, shown the data, it's already making us better as information stewards. I'm saying this with some confidence, and I'm really excited to go to our Exco in the coming month, our internal executive committee, to talk about this and atone for our sins a little bit. Hopefully you're a better audience than I'm expecting with them. But it is making us smarter in collaborate. So I said we assumed that we'd be good collaborators in TBS. 82% of files are being collaborated on by more than two people. We prove out the hypothesis that we had. And if 80% of your files are being collaborated on, a tool that really facilitates collaboration and real-time collaboration was a good investment for us. We're also seeing better IM practices with the automated prompts and creating and uploading of files. We can identify irregular user behavior immediately. I think Graham, you'll hear from him later today, he got a little note from IT security. He's like, hey, are you doing a bunch of scripting in SharePoint? Yep, that's me. And so, we can see unusual behavior like that with the IT security tools that M365 is also benefiting from. We've worked with our audit team recently to help them draw files for an audit that kind of exists across the entire department. So we're starting small, learning from each one of those to start writing out the processes and the procedures for some of these, and hoping in future to put some resources around some of the automation abilities in terms of retention and automated classifiers and things like that. So, we can only do what we can do with the folks that we have, and they have done a heck of a lot already. I look forward to answering some of those many questions that just came up, and I'll rely on Megan and Graham to help me as well, and Matthew and Pascal. If we want to take a few minutes to do that, Eric, I think that might couple, or do we want to wait till the end?
Yeah, thank you, Danielle. So there's major themes that are popping up in the chat here. There's a question that has been asked a few times, themes around GC Docs and sort of what is the sort of current state of GC Docs? Is it run in tandem with E5 right now? Are you still using GC Docs for your physical records? So what sort of is the current status of GC Docs as it relates to what you're doing in SharePoint and with E5?
So Great question. I kind of in part answered it here and there, but we have some files that were already identified for disposition were not moved as part of the SharePoint migration. Files that are on litigation hold are going to be retained there, and access to our IM team will be retained there. So the paths will identify where things are still sitting in GC Docs. So until such time as that, is not needed in time. And we also currently have a little small correspondence workflow tool that we're aiming to fix in 24-25. So it's still being used by the department. That'll be another opportunity for us to divest from a few more licenses. And we are also hanging on to it for our IM team to manage the physical records. They're all managed by us, so I don't need departmental licensing to continue to use a physical record. So the two main use cases will be maximum 10 to 15 licenses in SharePoint. We have an on-prem in the cloud. So we have our own managed service of GC Docs on 16.2 I forget. And it's in our cloud. So we want to minimize how much is still stored in there, just the bare minimum. It's either been disposed of, it's on litigation hold, or it's moved to SharePoint, and that'll reduce our compute utilization. I think I got it right, Megan.
Yeah, I think someone had asked too. We had said it before, but we are still utilizing GC Docs for our physical records, and there are some other things we'll have to do with some other review work on just litigation hold issues as well. Obviously, we're all dealing with Thompson, so there's some additional work to be in review to do on that, but it just requires IM licensing for that.
Thanks, Megan. So we're like, the questions are flying in. We're getting a ton of engagement, ton of discussion. What I think we'll do, I'll hold off on questions. Maybe some of these will be answered by our next presentations. And then secondly, I will take all the questions, we'll turn it into a document. Maybe we can work internally, Danielle and team, to answer the questions. We can send it out to all the attendees, so we make sure all the questions get sort of amalgamated, answered. Everyone gets their answers that they're looking for from this discussion. So I think that otherwise we're going to go way over time if we try to answer
Eric,
everything.
can I quickly just say though, just might help with some of the questions as well.
Yep.
We will share all the documentation we can. So on the PIA stuff, whatever we can, on the gold build configuration settings that we've got, on our structure, so anything that we can provide you, we will. There's some additional work going on with audit and review. We'll also share what we can there. So just on some of the questions, I know there's a lot of that. Some of it we will actually touch on in the next two sessions, like of us all talking. So some of those questions will be answered. But as far as the documentation question people have been having, we will be able to share, and we are looking to share all of that information as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Megan. And yes, the recording will be shared as well. Question in there. So we'll share everything. Open book here. So thank you, Danielle and Sylvain, for our first presentation this morning. I would like to throw it to the Change Management, Transformation, and Communications team. So as part of that, we have Pascal Patry, Manager Project Delivery Office from TBS, Matthew Nepsey, Communications Manager from TBS, and Andrew Prue, a Change Manager from Orangutech. So please, without further ado, take it away.
Thank you very much, Eric. Good morning, everybody. Lots of technical questions flying around in there. So, of course, I'm going to not address any of them. I want to talk about something that we had to front load a little bit. I've been with this project right from the onset. My goodness, going way back to 2019, where we made a very deliberate decision that we were going to co-lead this project. We had a technical lead at the time, our previous chief of information management, Joel Martin, you might remember, he had come and presented to the council in the past, was responsible for the technical implementation. And myself and my team, we were responsible for the change management side. Now, a lot of this came from the fact that Office 365 at the time, now M365, it was still relatively new. Had the chance to go out a lot, meet with Microsoft, meet with a lot of private industry players who were already in the space. And the one thing that was echoed resoundingly by everybody who'd already started to walk into this space was that change management had to at least be on par, if not a 60-40 split of the technical side of things. And when it was put in comparison, they were saying, it's not that technically challenging to implement this. It's not a huge custom development kind of thing, but the impact it's going to have on users and how they go about doing things really is significant. So we made sure to invest in that one, and that's where I do have to throw, I'll throw a little bone towards Orangutech, that they did a great job providing us a resource. But I really have to give massive kudos to Andrew Prue, the resource that we brought in as our senior change manager, not only with the very limited experience that was out there on how to go about navigating this, but brought a lot of technical expertise. Andrew, I just had to give that shout out because you weren't at the last one, and honestly, a lot of credit to you. Now, going back to 2019, when we were looking at this, right, we initially were looking at just the implementation of Office 365. We were just moving to the cloud. We knew that we wanted to give people the web-based tools that were available, and then move into all the other features that were available, including shifting to SharePoint as our new system to manage information records, or at the time, the EDRMS, I suppose, that it went through. And we had really grand visions of how we were going to engage with people. It was a little bit of that touchy-feely approach where we thought, yeah, no problem. We're going to do extensive user research with everybody and really figure out how do they want to interact. Because one of the driving factors was that our information architecture in GC docs, I believe the technical term that was used when it was explained to us was, it sucks. Nobody really found it intuitive the way that we had our architecture built out. Nobody understood where they were saving things. They had their shortcuts, they worked in their shortcuts, that was about it. But it didn't give them the collaboration features, the modern features they wanted. So great, we'll do user research. We're going to build a community of users who want to do this. There's so much outcry that they want this tool. We're going to build our digital evangelists who are going to assist with all of this, and they're going to stay actively engaged. We'll develop through iteration, and it was all this great notional stuff that we weren't able to plan for the pandemic around. And it really did throw things. Now, I do have to put this here because one of the common asks that we get is, can we share our change management plans or communication plans? All these great things that we had built out. And honestly, it wouldn't be worth sharing a lot of what we had. Partially because when it was built, it was pre-pandemic. Not only has the system itself, M365, has changed so dramatically from the early iterations that we had, but we also weren't able to leverage the communications mechanisms that we were planning for. We had to go from a very proactive approach to a very reactive approach. We had a workforce who, for a while, was not able to connect to the internet at all. Once they started getting tools, we were turning things on as fast as we could safely, logically do so, to give them access to work as a remote workforce, now a hybrid workforce. So we were very dynamic in how we went. But through all of this, as we were working with departments, the other thing that I'll share from the plans that we did come up with, how we approached this, and chatting with departments who are also trying to rapidly roll out Teams, as an example. We all went through that during the pandemic. Everybody was starting from somewhere different, and they all had a vision of a different end state. So as much as I'm going to talk very generically around how we approached this, I think the biggest takeaway that I can offer you is, do not undervalue the impact of change management. Don't try and do it with a small team, because not only is it going to be a massive part of your implementation exercise, including all the engagements we're going to discuss, but I want you to be thinking ahead as well post-implementation, where we are now. Great, we're live with SharePoint Online as our system to manage information and records. I still have years ahead of me in my planning, because it is one of those crawl, walk, run kind of situations. Once you get people into this system, how do you start enabling these new tools? How do you make sure that they're actually getting the benefits that you're looking for out of it? This is a massive ongoing change management exercise. And as Danielle alluded to, our wonderful friends at Microsoft love to add new tools, add a moment's notice, or shift functionality within tools without as much warning as we might like. Or they put it out there, but it's embedded in 37 reports on page 163, and you didn't really anticipate the impact it's going to have. It is a significant piece. So where did we go? One piece that I do want to share with you, and I'm really proud of how well this went. For those who haven't started the journey yet, Danielle alluded to how we planned out our rollout strategy around me, we, and us. we're going to walk users through this. How are we going to do it? And we focused around the idea of implementing it in bite-sized chunks, right? We launched Me, personal productivity, focused around OneDrive, but a couple of other tools that are really around how do I work when I create my drafts? If I'm creating or replacing my personal workspace, how do I go about doing this? And it starts to expose them to the tools. We then moved into the we space, that collaborative team productivity space. This became a little bit interesting how we launched it at TBS, because if you're not aware of what group sprawl is, do jot down group sprawl, look it up. You'll find lots on it. It's the first thing that you want to be very cautious of from a technical implementation standpoint. Lots of different tools in M365, when you turn them on, will create Microsoft groups before you know. It gets out of hand very quickly. And managing that, there are several departments, unfortunately, that are having to walk back pieces of their rollouts. We were fortunate. We were further ahead of the game when COVID hit than many, if not most, departments were. So we did know enough to not allow users to create their own teams just using the inherent tools. We did build an application, just a small in-house app, that would manage the creation of teams, so that we would put some disposition around them. Users had the opportunity to create either 1 year, 2 year, or permanent teams. And then there was different workflows and permissions attributed to them, including contacting our IM team directly if they wanted to create a permanent team. So we could figure out how that needed to tie into our architecture. After we got that collaboration tool and space in place, we moved into the us, and that's our SharePoint implementation, moving people into that more horizontal enterprise-wide collaboration space. And of course, the unified search across it. It was a mechanism, it was a methodology that we found most users were really able to gravitate towards, and it did provide some good, interesting messaging. Now, I will share with all of you that we did toy around with a fourth piece, them, that we notionally called it on external collaboration. We're not there yet. We don't yet know how that's going to roll out, but it is something that we got a lot of questions about. And I saw some of you asking questions around external collaboration as well. So as you go through this journey, do anticipate that and how you're going to get into it. Now, while we were working through this, there were a couple of pieces, again, that really did contribute to our iceberg, the heavy lifting we did behind the scenes. And that's where the next presentation, when Megan and Graham come in, they're going to get into the more technical pieces. But I already touched on that ad hoc teams request tool, right? Putting the layers or the challenge questions in place so that if somebody spins up a team outside of our information architecture, SharePoint Online or permanent architecture, our team space is a temporary space. It's not designated as part of our system to manage information records. So having those predefined dispositions tied into it, right? We asked them, do you want this team for 1 year, for 2 years? Is it a long project or not? And having the tags in there so that we can go back and create a challenge function. Okay, it's been alive for 2 years. Are you still using it? Great, we'll give you 1 more year. We'll check back in. Or no, you're done. All right, let's look at how do we migrate this information into the repository and then spin down this team, again, avoiding that group sprawl. We did build an in-house GC Docs to SharePoint Online migration tool. I saw the question coming up, and I won't steal too much of the tech team's thunder, but what tool did we use? We built it in-house. And again, some of it might be usable by some of you, but we're all starting from different places. We're all going to different places. So ours was very purpose-built, but very proud of the work that had, because from a communication standpoint, we committed to our users that while this tool is running and it's copying information from one location to another, you're going to continue working in GC Docs during the migration phase. Nobody loses access. At the time that we did this, that was a huge piece because there were no tools that would allow us to do this without downtime. The reality of today, I don't know. Remember, we're talking about years that we were going in this. So our choice may or may not be the most logical choice now for you to go down, but that's one piece that we had done that we're extremely proud of, and it did manage things very effectively for us. On the change management side for content owners, something that I forgot to bring up in the last presentation, Danielle caught me on it, that really worked out well is as soon as we launched Teams, we created a standalone org-wide team. Everybody was automatically a member. You couldn't opt out of it, called Get to Know M365. Not only did it help us in promoting the tools, facilitating communication, hey, let's use the tools that we just launched to help promote this. We found that very quickly it actually built up an internal self-service community. Not only were we monitoring it, the change management team was in there daily, responding to questions in real time. If you launch something like this, you better have the support behind it to answer questions. Otherwise, people disengage very quickly. But over the period of a short amount of time, we already answered questions. So users were faster to respond. Oh, that was already answered by the team. This is actually how long the disposition goes for. Oh, you can find this function. Hey, did anybody else notice that? So it turned into more than just the change management team communicating, but it created this self-fulfilling, self-managing user group that promoted things internally. So if you haven't considered something like this, I really do recommend you do so. Again, resource it properly, but you can get massive dividends out of that, and we continue to do so. We did launch mandatory training for all employees. Can we share the training? Yeah, we can share transcripts. It's big. It was one of the biggest asks on this, and there's two pieces to it. We're not trying to replace the SPS's training on information management. It is still an essential piece, and it is still extremely valid. But we did have to teach people, one, the new information architecture and how it's being used, and two, this new tool that a lot of people didn't necessarily know. Even people who knew SharePoint on-prem, let's call it, functionality is a little different than SharePoint Online. How does it all work together? So we agreed, okay, we had buy-in from our senior executive. We need mandatory training. I'm a stickler for words. Is it training? No, it's a mandatory information session. Training is hands-on. You get to do stuff. We couldn't get buy-in for the amount of time that would be necessary to get people to sit down and actually click through and do certain functions. When we looked at everything that wanted to be covered, it was almost a day's worth of training, and we couldn't get buy-in for that. Tried to shrink it down to half a day. No, couldn't be done. We managed to land on 3 hours, and it is an intense 3 hours of here's how we've organized information in the new architecture. Here's why it's going to be simple. And my colleague Pascal is going to talk about how we developed that architecture in just a second. And then once we focused on, okay, here's how it's organized. Here's how the information is managed and how you can function in that. We got into a little bit of the basics of using M365, or specifically SharePoint Online. Where do you click? How do you navigate through? And I'll say we kept it simple because at the recommendation, again, of our change management lead, Andrew Prue, that we brought in, we did integrate learning pathways, Microsoft's learning pathways, right into our SharePoint architecture. If you're not familiar with learning pathways, again, something to look up, but they're small, bite-sized training videos that Microsoft self-curates. So it's already evergreen for you. You can trim which ones you want and don't. We removed a lot of the videos that were relevant. Example, we don't leverage Yammer in our department. So we removed everything that had to do with Yammer. Why confuse people and create issues? You can add your own little bite-sized videos, but now we've got these little nuggets that are not part of the mandatory training, but always available to people, pointing them at it. We do not have an LMS at TBS, a learning management system. So we did have to get very manual with how we track the training. The short version is because the training was available either through in-person virtual sessions or through pre-recorded videos. At the end of that, or having completed it, you're provided a link to an MS Forms, which ties to our Active Directory. So I know exactly who clicks it, right, logs their information. And it's an attestation that an individual is saying, okay, yeah, I've completed the self-paced training, or I've attended the training. I'm aware of my obligations, have a couple of bullets there so that, you know, it gives them that realization moment of, if you click this, you're telling us that you understand the fundamentals of it and you know where to look if you forget who to contact. That was enough for us to basically manage that mandatory training. And we did tie some pretty stringent consequences around this as well. As Danielle said, one piece that we didn't do very well, we were working on developing the super user training, right, for our high-end users, but we didn't launch that at the same time because we hadn't yet built that community. Recommend front-end loading that, building it up. We did hold off on training until we were very close to the launch date. We only launched training about a month before our plan to go live, simply because what's the point of learning how to do something through an information session if you can't actually click on it in a timely manner? People will forget it. So do time it accordingly. And of course, we built a brand new information architecture for where we were going to migrate our information from and to. And that's where I'm going to hand it over to Pascal, who really did the heavy lifting on working with our users on defining, well, what should that look like? Well, Pascal, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. And like Matthew, I was part of the project team from the start in 2018. So I've been able to work with these fine folks since then, and I'm quite proud of that. So to set the stage, we've all worked within an IA before. We've all been lucky to do so. Whether it be org-based or functional, based on IAM Common Core or GVTs, we've all experienced similar pain points: information sprawl, duplication, permissions issues, issues with finding files. We quickly realized that no matter what type of traditional structure we'd build, these challenges would likely remain. So to keep focus on our guiding IAM principles, we kept the design in-house between our IAM specialists and project team members. Before we designed anything, we thought it best to be establishing design principles first. We wanted the IA to support collaboration across TBS, breaking those silos that we see when working with the traditional architectures. We wanted users to know where to find and save their work. We wanted it to be user-centric and user-friendly, as flat as possible. We wanted to enable business unit functions and processes. We wanted it to be open by default to the level possible. And we wanted to use hub sites to create logical navigation structures. But most importantly, we knew we had to anticipate change. So we thought it really important to establish ongoing client engagement from the start. As a result, if we can go to the next slide, Matt. We built an IA based on who users needed to collaborate with. The first such space, sector, for collaboration between a whole sector or pockets within. The second space, internal services, for secure collaboration between clients and service providers. The third one being collaboration, where multiple user groups can work together on files related to things like committees. And finally, hub sites, open by default landing pages for each of those space types to share information across TBS. Now that we had kind of a straw man designed, we knew we had to take our show on the road, so to speak. So next slide, please. Why did we do this? Well, first, we wanted to validate our assumptions and make minor adjustments as required. And we wanted to collect additional requirements that we hadn't thought of during the initial design phase. We thought that we pilot this approach with the Office of the Public Service Accessibility for two reasons. The major one being we wanted to test our IA against accessibility to make sure that it was accessible as possible. And secondly, they were a small team, so we were able to benefit from bringing this small team into an actual meeting room to hash out some of their requirements and work on accessibility. And Andrew Prue actually helped with that as well, making sure that we knew shortcuts for keyboards and things like that to help our users navigate through the architecture. How did we do this? So, after that, we worked with the chiefs of staff of each sector to obtain names for sector reps that would help us or assist us in the design phase of the architecture. We started with 1-hour kickoff sessions to talk about our approach to IA design. And from there, we held 3-hour sessions with each business area to complete the requirements gathering. Through those sessions, what was very important for us was we were able to visually represent their IA in a sandbox to showcase it and obtain final validation. A lot of the back and forth that we were having was very theory-based, and it's only when they were able to actually see the architecture in action in SharePoint where we saw the best gains. We also had several town hall sessions with sectors where ADM participation was key to get sector buy-in and helped us build a bit of hype for the work that we were doing and share the importance of the work as well. As a result, we created design guides for each sector that contain their structure requirements as well as who should have access to those parts of the architecture. And next slide, Matt. And we set out to boil the ocean. So once we had all the requirements, it was time to align the current state, which was GC Docs, to future state. We helped our clients make sense of GC Docs by exporting folder information into Excel mapping documents. What we did might have been inadvisable, but we had IM pre-map all these locations to the new information architecture, do some pre-mapping for our clients, a bit along the lines of Danielle and the white glove service. To give you a sense, the level of effort was around 900,000 folders in GC Docs, and we needed to map those to about 850 sites in SharePoint. So a lot of Excel lines to go through. So we did a line-by-line review with subject matter experts and GC Docs experts as well, noting that those who knew GC Docs were not necessarily those that we first engaged. Once that was done and the mapping complete, we handed over these scripts to the M365 technical team, who was responsible for migrating the information into SharePoint. And that's what we have so far.
So I want to make sure that we have plenty of time for the technical side. Hey, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas. We know that. I want to share just a couple of very brief points on what went well and what didn't for recommendations. What went well, I talked about already. The approach we took, the new us, the org-wide team that we had, the dedicated resource that we had in change management. There was a question there, what do we consider a large team? Depends on the number of files you're moving. We were smaller than I would have liked. At our height, we were 6 people on change management, only 2 of which were dedicated. That was a short time. For the majority of the project, we only had 1 dedicated resource. That was Andrew, working purely on change management, and then others at about 50% capacity. I would have liked it better, because what would we have changed? One, plan for delays a lot more significantly than we did. We were trailblazing on this one, so we thought we had a handle on how long it would take, and we did have some contingency plans on communicating with users if there were delays, but we didn't anticipate the significance of it, and we'll talk about the technical reasons for that, big one being permissions. And as Daniel alluded to, right, it turned into we were always communicating the same thing. We're still working on it, and we'll get there. But we hadn't really refined how we were measuring. It was difficult for us to tell people in a way that would show progress. And we were continuously repeating that message. So it started to sound very much like we're just telling people, we're working on it, be patient. But we couldn't provide any tangibles. I really would have liked to be better prepared to plan for some of those delays, communicate the delays more effectively. I wasn't. I do recommend that, because this is a significant undertaking. Be ready for those, and how are you going to do it? The other thing I would have liked to communicate better on was around what open looks like in SharePoint Online. As much as we had permissions issues from a technical side, we didn't necessarily clean it up well. We didn't understand, right, that as of level 20, everything goes sideways and all of a sudden it's a new architecture. But even the areas where users said, no, it's open in GC Docs, I'm okay with it being open in SharePoint, they didn't quite understand that, well, when this goes live, because of how SharePoint recommends information, it's not just people can access it. People are going to start seeing what it is you're working on. And we had quite a few panicked calls from people who either didn't anticipate this. Well, it's okay that they have access, but they don't necessarily need to see it. It got some anxiety up. But they also didn't understand how the tools would necessarily demonstrate through security trimming. So they would see what they thought was, oh my God, it's online, or everybody sees it the way that I see it. And it had to turn into a lot of reassurance on, no, you're seeing it simply because of that's how it's shared. Don't worry, the other members in your team can't. And we even went so far as sometimes screen sharing. Let's bring somebody else to call, have them open their screen, and you can see what, see, they don't see it. Again, it's that really big shift on how these tools demonstrate things. So do spend a lot of time helping them understand what's going to be involved there. The last piece that I would have had to spend a lot more time on is Pascal talked about the work that we did to develop that new architecture. And we worked very closely with the community on focusing on what should this new place of work look like. And then once we were developing that, partly because of COVID and all the timing and the shifting, we kind of left that group and that work to the side. And then we started working separately on, okay, the stuff that already exists, let's focus on that. Where should it go and how are we going to map it? There wasn't as much continuity between those two pieces we would have liked. And what happened was that new architecture, a lot of it was empty. And the way we built the tool, well, it didn't create the sites. We were so focused on how people were working, the stuff that was in the system, making sure that we migrated it to where we thought it would be the right place. When we went live, nobody cares about the stuff that was created 3 years ago. Not many people. They care about what am I doing today and where am I working today? And we lost sight of that a little bit. We were very focused on the existing information instead. What was there and are we going to put it in the right space? So people wanted to work in this new tool. You're not going to have to build hype around this, but we didn't have it right. Those are kind of the big spaces where I would have spent more time on. Now, that's the change management side. We'll answer as many questions we can afterwards through the chat. We'll get back to you. But I want to hand it over to, I guess, Eric, who's going to introduce our next presenters, focusing on what I know you're all chomping at the bit for. So thank you for your time and for your questions, everybody.
Thanks, Matthew. Appreciate the discussion. We are going to hop right into the technical discussion. I think that's going to answer a lot of questions we have in the chat. We're going to go a little bit over 11:30. The discussion has, I think led to a little bit more time. So I'd like to give it to Megan and Graham. Megan is the Chief IM over at TBS and Graham, the team lead for M365 over at TBS. So please, without further ado, Megan and Graham.
Sure. Hi, everybody. So we're going to do our best here to actually sort of tailor our discussion a little bit to the questions that are there, just to make this as meaningful as possible for everybody. And so that's how we're going to do it. So the other thing too, I want to just kind of keep in mind for everybody here that's on this call, TBS was in a very different spot than a lot of departments were. And the purpose of this discussion is not to say this is the exact way you should be doing it. Because our starting point is going to be different from yours, and your landing point is going to be different than ours. Your holdings are going to be different. Your risk assessments are going to be different. These are all things to consider. This is just things where we are hoping that if there's anything that we can share that's going to be helpful to you in whatever sort of progression, whatever journey or whatever decisions you make of what whatever your information ecosystem is going to be. Not everyone's going to be able to do a full scale migration to M365. There'll be many people who are going to be using sort of connecting points and different things with GC Docs. And we also know people are still working from RDIMMs, shared drives, GC Docs, sometimes all three and more. So just keep that in mind. We're trying to just kind of give you sort of what our experience was and share what we can that's going to be helpful, but fully understanding other aspects of this is that we went from completely on the cloud, GC Docs on the cloud to SharePoint online, right? Everybody in TBS has a phone, has a mobile device. So for MFA and zero trust model, things like that, we were very situated to do that well. And everybody has the same hardware. So everybody has the same tablet and everybody has the same phone. So there's the starting points, just so everyone's kind of on the level set, clear. There's a few things where we were very green light, everything was kind of green lights here at TBS to be able to make some of these decisions. So just to level set that as well. Greg, want to go ahead?
Sure. Thanks, Megan. So as mentioned, we're also going to try and expedite the presentation component of this and focus what we're doing on the questions, because a lot of the questions that have been popping up, we were hoping to cover anyways, and they're the questions that everybody has. So just out of the gate, thanks, Eric, for the introduction of Megan and myself. Also kind of in the previous panel was Garth Martin, who was really the developer of our custom tool that we'll mention later on. He's unfortunately not able to be here today, but he was kind of the architect and ran through a lot of the roadblocks, though we were sort of joined at the hip. So if there's any questions that come up in that side, I'm able to answer those as well. So starting, we want to talk a little bit about the technical architecture. And there's a lot, as mentioned, that happened over the course of this long project when you talk about implementing OneDrive and implementing Teams and all these things, as we get to the culmination, which was launching SharePoint as our system to manage information and data. And that's where a lot of our presentation focuses on, because to be honest, the implementation of a OneDrive or of Teams in and of itself, the application of Teams, is fairly straightforward as people look at the functionality that's specifically delivered by those in the me and the personal, and the we largely in the calling and the webinars and chat and those kind of components. Understanding There's a document backend to Teams that is SharePoint. But what I want to get out as a key point here, SharePoint's a platform. There's a ton of stuff that lives inside of SharePoint. And when we talk about what we delivered as a component of this project, we had to really focus on what are we actually implementing? Because by the time we got here, SharePoint was live. People were using SharePoint in the back end of Teams as they were getting these ad hoc teams. You see SharePoint in the URL of OneDrive. People had seen it, and that does introduce a lot of confusion, and it can really muddy up the governance and the decision making. So what we had to focus on is, what are we trying to do when we say launch SharePoint? And for us, that specifically landed as delivering a system to manage information and data hosted in SharePoint. So that allowed us to really streamline the decisions that we were making and align our governance to make decisions quickly. Things like understanding that what we wanted to deliver for permissions levels and permissions operations did not jive with how Teams uses Microsoft 365 groups and what exists in the architecture of how you run Teams. So it was a pretty easy decision to make that, you know what, our SharePoint information architecture is not going to be connected to Teams at the onset, because it adds too much complication to the rigor that we're trying to add to these spaces. And what we landed with is essentially our SharePoint information architecture is a list of specifically configured, named, and structured sites that make up our information architecture. There are other SharePoint sites that fuel Team sites. There are other SharePoint sites that do application level work in the back end of, let's say, Power Apps or these other tools. But our SharePoint information architecture within the governance of information management is a list of sites. I believe we're up to just over 1,000 sites right now, and we have a list of those exact sites. So we know what it is, and we know how they're configured. We have a gold build that says these are the permissions groups, permissions levels, site features, all of those components. And those decisions became easier and easier to make when we realized we were trying to create a system of work where people could place their things and we could do proper information management governance and apply the proper rigor to those spaces. So that's where what we're talking about when we say a SharePoint information architecture. But in order to actually deliver a system to manage information and data, we had to utilize the whole infrastructure. And that's when we're talking about the utilization of Microsoft Purview. That's when we understand the utilization of what's going on in Microsoft 365 groups that we can leverage inside of our architecture. An example is, at TBS, we have an excellent tool called My Profile Self-Service, and that allows us to tag organization information to custom fields in Active Directory. And we can use those to drive dynamic permissions groups that we use inside of our architecture. So that's getting into a custom developed app along with Active Directory to enable the operations and make the management of our space even better. And really, it's about building those relationships. I work for Megan. I'm inside of information management, even though I'm an M365 technical lead. And we have built very strong relationships with IT security and infrastructure, the other decision makers, the other, people looking for value propositions inside of M365. As Danielle mentioned, I'll get a chat from IT security saying, hey, we noticed your name's popping up in a bunch of our alerts for deleted files, for running scripts. Are you doing something right now? I'm like, yeah, we're formatting these sites and we're running this. And that's a chat we can have, the same as infrastructure will send me a message going, hey, this new Teams experience coming out, or we want to use SharePoint as the backend for this, or we're migrating Canadian Digital Service from TBS over to ESDC. And we have this constant communication about how we can each add value to each other's teams. So that's where we create this kind of entire infrastructure ecosystem that allows us to push this technical architecture forward, get what we need from an information management perspective to apply this governance, to use the purviews alongside IT security. That's a shared tool. It does a ton of stuff to leverage what infrastructure is doing in Active Directory and to respond to things like moving into my GCHR and to track what's going on in that space, is to have these strong relationships and utilize the entire infrastructure of tools and teams at TBS to deliver this. And I'll talk quickly about keeping up with the cloud, because this is one of the big lessons learned as we went through. things are changing constantly. And where we started with our gold build and the configurations we had versus when we actually cut over into SharePoint, just what's available is drastically different. And while we were delivering, we had to make fairly frequent returns to what we were delivering and if it still made sense anymore. And I think even that's something we missed on because we didn't do that full, like, take stock of, is there anywhere we could be adding value? Is there anything that we need to change because of the way Microsoft has changed how, let's say, sharing works or permissions work inside the system? So a lot of these other questions about the what migrated over are going to be handled on my last slide, but I'm going to hand it over to Megan to really talk about, we've done technical, now let's talk about that information management, creating it as a place where we can apply that governance.
Yeah. So the one thing I will say is, so from an IM perspective on SharePoint, I have far more visibility than I did in GC Docs in a weird way. And I think we did that whole session on change management. One thing I like to always make sure that I'm very much emphasizing is make sure you do that same change management with your own IM teams. This is a huge change for them. What they used to have as an admin right within maybe RDIMS or especially within GC Docs, what they were used to of being able to control that really changes here. Even now, we're still sort of figuring out some of the admin roles from the Microsoft perspective of Purview and others. For the question that was, what are we utilizing for retention disposition? We are utilizing Microsoft Purview and the E5 license. We are going to be looking at leveraging things like trainable classifiers and others. But our first area of work is really all the RSI work that we had done in GC Docs. How do we translate that into Microsoft speak, essentially? And rip through that within our architecture. So utilizing what we had there and pushing it through our system now. But our main target was really getting that information over. Graham will talk a little bit about the tool. I'll be honest with you, I don't know how useful it'll be for all the different departments because it was very specific to us and to that time period. But essentially, some of the things we had talked about, like, you know, embracing those limitations, we've talked about, people brought it up, of the 400 character limit. What that meant was all those really fun titles that people had in their folders of like, this is just, RSI. So that was essentially a retention scheduling identifiers. So it's the GC Docs speak for your retention label. So it was pretty specific to GC Docs. We want to make sure these more are agnostic. So thank you for that. But essentially, it's what does that look like within retention labels and policies within the M365 space. So yes, on the limitation side of things, so when we had those really long folder names of like, this is Graham's and he only opens this folder on Fridays, but it was in an old structure and like that was the title, obviously far too long to move over. But it's also, it's a bit of a change management as well of like working with your group. Thank you, Rick, it's using it, okay. It's essentially working with those groups to be able to say, okay, you used to have like contracts 2015 contracts, like we would have a lot of duplication even in folder levels, where we're like, maybe we can just put these under contracts and you can start utilizing metadata to be able to enrich your data in different ways, not through folder titles, but through actual metadata. This is something that, especially if you were living in the GC Docs world before, and depending on how you had things set up, users might not have had the ability to work with categories and attributes. RDIMS was a bit different. We really utilize metadata a lot more there. Here, we really let the users, now we do work from an advisory capacity. I'm like, you know, if we're working on taxonomies or if they're working for an actual data dictionary, things like that. But really opening up the door for users to actually create their own metadata in ways that has actually been really helpful for IM. So I remember years of like thought work of like, how do we actually like build in the trigger for all these different files so that we're actually meeting our retention, and like, how do we do that? And now users are actually just doing it themselves, or like looking at all the metadata that they're creating, like, oh, this is fantastic. I can absolutely leverage these pieces for lifecycle management. They're using it for them to be able to categorize, to work on views, to be able to export that information for dashboarding and reporting. So like they're getting all this additional benefit, and we're being able to pull this out and utilize it for us as well. So we did have our IM people working on this. We didn't have a specific metadata specialist. I would say we had people who were working previously, obviously, and working with different groups with their files within GC Docs and moving things over. But we weren't really utilizing categories and attributes that effectively within GC Docs, so there wasn't a ton to be able to move over. But on the migration of metadata, and especially the system metadata, the tool that was created moved over all versions that were previously there. You can see those versions now. So if anyone's ever worked or shared a document within M365, you go to the top screen and you can see your version history. That will show all the previous versions as they were in GC Docs, but they live there now. We also, this is another specific one that we really thought about in like the change management side, but we brought over the original file path and the node ID of GC Docs so that users can still find that information, or if it landed in a place, they're like, where did this used to live in GC Docs? They can actually see exactly where it used to be within the folder structure of the old system. So we did, it was mentioned as well that we kept GC Docs read-only for the last years, and we put redirects in. So if you were to click on something, it would take you to where it landed in SharePoint. If people weren't sure, that's where it went. The redirect will continue to work on any old GC Docs links that were maybe in emails or documentation. It will redirect you there, or you can search on that node ID as a metadata. So that's also been quite helpful as well for users. And it'll mean a little bit less and less as we move on and people are less familiar with what the GC Doc structure was, but we found that helpful. We're also having users actually understand internal services a little bit better. So now when people are like, well, I do this work all the time where I'm constantly having to send emails back and forth between our HR advisor. We're like, wouldn't it be great if you had a site where you can save that and you have access and they have access and it just lives there and you can shortcut it in if you want to the site that you work in, but all the permissions remain there. And they're like, that would be great. I'm like, cool, that's internal services. So it's kind of like a place where people didn't quite understand what it meant in traditional architecture, but they're actually understanding it more now. We did previously as well have the Artems libraries that were sort of like, I call them the junk drawers. I'm sure a lot of people know the frustration of that, but essentially just taking everything that was there before, putting in this legacy folder and then it living there. But what people still were doing was working in those files as well. So the amount of users that have come forward and been like, hey, these are like in this old legacy folder, but we use this. Can I actually just move it into our regular folder structure? And you're like, absolutely, would love that. Please do. So there's a lot more that we can actually utilize the participation of users in that we didn't have before, that IM used to have to do a lot more heavy lifting. And now we're kind of just like, well, yeah, you can go ahead and move that. If you want to go ahead and do that, absolutely. So we're getting a little bit more help. We're kind of throwing it back to users as well. I've had some when we're pulling out mapping documents and it's like those really long folder paths being like, you know what, I'm not going to have to, like, why would I do the thought work on what this folder structure could look like? I'm going to send it back to you. And like, what does this make sense to you? The other thing that, because we gave those ad hoc team sites, which from an admin perspective on the issue of sprawl, those are reviewed by the IM team of whether or not they're provided or not. But I have a full list. I can see exactly all the different team sites that are created, if they're still being leveraged, how much information is in there, who's using them. Like I have complete control to still manage all that information. I can roll them up into the repository if I want to. So the sprawl has been contained. But one really cool thing that happened was these were blank spaces where teams went in and they started saving information in the exact way that made sense to them. And so we're not kind of like, we're essentially taking that and we're like, okay, so without any sort of governance, sort of structuring, how did they save information? We're like, let's take that. We also, I mean, there's a lot of people who are like, we hate GC Docs. And then we moved over and they're like, but I loved GC Docs because they're like, I really liked my little path that I got down. So let's take things that worked there. Let's take things that worked in Teams and let's put them together. Because on the back end, my ability to do the searches, to be able to kind of classify information is so robust now that I can let them do this a little bit more. And I'm not beholden to the structure. Whereas before we kind of called that very sort of top down, sort of hierarchical tree. We talk to users, we say, these are kind of your functional islands. So this is maybe your org island. You work in this team, there's your island. Or maybe functionally you work on this island. And it's really about how do you want to get to that island? Like, what's the best way for you to work? Okay, let's build those bridges in. I can do it through navigation. I can do it through shortcuts. I can do it through follow sites, and you can kind of see it on the side. So it's been really helpful to kind of like work with users of like, don't think about the tool right now. Think about how you work with information, and then like let's make that fit, and let's use all the different things. Like I had a completely blank space to see how people want to save their information. Let's use that because like then they're going to use it. So it helps with adoption. It helps with a lot of things. There is some more work to be done on GBT. I know the question there was on GBTs and IMCC. We've done a little bit of that. There's a lot of work that went on within GC Docs that we are looking to leverage and move over. Again, we can do a lot of that stuff because we know exactly how we moved it over. So I can find all that information and apply it where we can. But I know the GBTs are also being updated. So we'll take a look at that. Our disposition authority with LAC is also being looked at. And so that's another piece of our work that we're going to be looking at. It does have a lot of the same capabilities. There's a lot of work still on our side as well to get to know some of the functionality that's within Purview, but you can make records immutable. You can attach record labels and retention labels. You can pull reports for disposition and workflow them if you'd like. If you are utilizing workflow in GC Docs, you will have to do a little bit of thought work on how you want to move that over. There are third-party tools. There is Power Platform. There are different things. So just keep that in mind if that's a mission critical thing for your business that you need to move over. If you're utilizing workflow, you will have to do a bit of work there. What else am I thinking? Thinking about shortcuts. If your people use shortcuts over there, think about those as well, of how you're going to be able to move those over, because that is something that some groups really relied on. And from IM, we've always asked them to do that. We did some cleanup ahead of time. We are finding it is easier to do it in SharePoint. And also because people are so excited about their SharePoint sites, they're actually doing a lot of the cleanup for us. They're like, hey, we had a lot of these folders that said to be deleted. Can we just get rid of this? And we're like, so long as it's not HR, sure. So we're doing a lot more of that. We're actually having users a little bit more interested in actually cleaning their stuff up. They're like, we have this new space. Like, we want to make sure that it like actually suits our needs. Can we do this work? Like, yeah, 100%. And so instead of IM having to do so much heavy lifting, and let's be honest, we're all super stretched tight. I know most of our teams are quite small, mine included. And we were stretched on this because we were both delivering on the project and still creating and still providing operational support to GC Docs, to Teams, to OneDrive, to SharePoint. So we are very stretched. And so if anything we can do, and what we were kind of trying to pivot towards more so now, is on more on the auditing review side. So going forward, like on permissions and things, Graham talked about MPSS. That's users going in and specifically saying what group they work for. It gets approved by their direct supervisor. We utilize that as an org ID to be able to say, okay, if you work in this team, then you get access in general at the site level to that information. To the best of our abilities, we did to start off, like we wanted to walk before we ran. We did one document library per site, and we created one permission structure per site. We did it as best we could to essentially reflect what their MPSS login information was. For more lockdown ones, we work with content owners and we work with those core dynamic groups where they can kind of like look at what the actual permission list is and manage it that way. But that's to the best for, like, that's kind of where we started from. Let's start as kind of as easily as we can, so that it was a little bit easier to manage for people to understand as well. So that's another thing that we had done. I think I was trying to grab everything, but yes, so we're pivoting in to try to help out teams to kind of say, okay, instead of being like, contact us every time you need a permission change, we're going to go to them and say, maybe like monthly, quarterly, we're still figuring this out, but go to them and say, hey, this is your current permission list on your site. Does this make sense to you? Are there people who are no longer here? Has your function changed? Should we fix these groups? So I am having a much less of a day-to-day requirement on having to make these changes. It takes up so much of our time, and more about how do we do this from a review perspective. And our ability to pull dashboards out of M365 is really helpful in that regard, to be able to point us in those directions. So we do allow sharing. Users got really comfortable with sharing of like folders. So we keep it at the main permission level. We are doing work of like letting people know, remember, if you're sending these out. But again, that's part of the audit. We're like, hey, these are your base permissions. We have noticed that you've got all these different shares out. Should you clean that up? Should you be revoking? So work like that is going to be continuously ongoing. We are looking to leverage our content owner super user groups as well, to be able to kind of talk to them about ongoing changes, anything on the roadmap. I'm going to try to get back to them these questions once Graham's going. I'll review again, just in case we can clean up anything at the end. On the issue of audit, we are still looking at that. The amount of audit actions that are in M365, to be honest with you, is overwhelming. It is probably overkill. So on what we would actually need to retain for actual lifecycle management and for legal and for essentially legal compliance on things. So we are still looking at that. We aren't at the point where we are losing anything, but we have some options. Gray might be able to talk a little bit more about that, but we are still kind of looking at that options analysis on how we do audit. But I mean, you can literally see how everything that has been done within the M360 environment, within OneDrive, within Teams, and within our SharePoint environment. So there's quite a bit there. So we're still sort of working through that a little bit. I think I've covered most everything, but really, we are very user-centric, and we're sort of doing more of the IM in the background because I have such a robust search capability. We are going to be scratching surfaces on trainable classifiers in the new year as well, and leveraging, hopefully, the retention work that we did in GC Docs to help inform that process. We'll be doing that with our Microsoft partners as well. We're getting that training there as well. So that's kind of where we're going with that side of the shop. And then I'll bring it back to Graham.
Thanks, Megan. So now we get to we'll call it a little bit more technical, and hopefully I'm gonna knock off a bunch of questions just by giving a definition of what we built. We built a custom migration tool that uses a bunch of different technologies, but the flow of an item is that we grab a folder in GC Docs. We take all of the documents down via XML onto a virtual machine. That's, as Sylvain mentioned, one of the areas where we had a lot of expandability in our capacity because we were using cloud VMs to do this. That document, once on the VM, gets put into a predetermined SharePoint location, and then we apply the metadata that we want to apply, which was extracted alongside that GC Docs document. The nice thing, this actually creates, it is a copy of the document. So the document still exists inside of GC Docs as it is in place, and we have created a document inside of SharePoint that has all of the versions that created the modified by information. Now, as was asked in the questions, if we don't have an active user on the SharePoint side, we had to sub in essentially an admin account name in that piece, but we do still have the information from the GC Docs audit logs that will be retained as long as those documents are retained to identify any history if we need to on those documents. Now, that's what we built. We built a system where we hand the tool a node ID for a folder from GC Docs, a target location, and a folder structure. And it goes and it grabs all the documents and it puts them in that structure on the SharePoint side. What we should have built is the entire life cycle of where this is, how and why we decided it's going to that location inside of SharePoint when we're doing our mapping, keeping up with the changes in GC Docs and what exists. The tool did synchronize. So once we move that over, it would check, has anything changed in that folder? And if it's changed, we can update it on the SharePoint site. So we could run this 6 months before we actually cut over, but it would keep it in sync with what was changing on that GC Docs side. Now, this is where some of our points come into play. And the first one is keep your actual audience in mind. When we built this migration tool, we had this blue sky information management view of what the architecture was going to be. And then we went and we built our custom tool. And then, as mentioned by Pascal and Matthew, we were doing all of these IA design guide sessions, and we had, passionate people in the room figuring that out and what we wanted our site architecture to look like and all of these things. And then we got to the point where we were actually taking line items, which were folders in GC Docs, and going, how are these going to be represented inside of SharePoint, inside of this IA design that we've come up with? And that's when we realized that people weren't quite as comfortable with this pie in the sky version of the information management architecture as we thought they would be. And we started to see some creep back of, okay, well, we want some folder structure, or maybe all of a sudden they decided they really like GC Docs and they want the whole folder structure, and we're dealing with long paths and these things. And we had built the tool with this, everything gets grouped up into these higher level spaces, and we're using metadata and creating views and all this stuff. So at that point, we kind of just were working forward with the tool we had created. And I quote Garth when he says, well, you guys were only supposed to load like 80 jobs. And we ended up loading approximately 880,000 jobs, which were effectively individual folders that were ungrouped, and we're moving that folder to a specific location inside of SharePoint. So I would recommend whatever you're doing toolkit wise, whether you're using a ShareGate coming from SharePoint, GC Docs on-prem, whatever your solution is, DevOps your toolkit. Keep coming back to it. Run sprints. We actually had to have a little section in our weekly meetings that says, this is what we're updating the tool to respond to what we're seeing as we're migrating things through. That's the other one is, sounds weird, and the IT folks in the room aren't going to like me, test and prod. We were working with the GC Docs cloud instance that came from a migration from RDIMS to GC Docs on-prem, which came from on-prem to on-prem in the cloud. And there were a lot of back-end things that were weird in that space, and it was really difficult to set that up in the UAT environment and actually find what the problems were going to be. Some of those problems were large files tanking our export service, or, and this was a question that came up, throttling. There are things that you can do according to Microsoft documentation and built into a custom tool to deal with throttling. But when it comes to dealing with throttling and throughput, we anticipated something along the lines of a 6-week migration of all of our stuff. Again, 880,000 folders. I think it was 9 terabytes worth of data. And that was going from cloud GC Docs to cloud VMs to cloud SharePoint. It probably took us 4 to 6 months worth of migration effort to get through everything that existed. And that's where some of that change management came in of what are we doing now? How are we advertising this to people? So that's where we say, plan for future flexibility. Reduce your variables. What are we moving over? What are we pulling in? We actually really reduced the amount of metadata that we're pulling over because it wasn't super well used inside of GC Docs in our context. So we pulled in that GC Docs path, node ID, created, modified. But when it came to even file types and things like that, it just wasn't consistently enough applied that we needed to worry about extracting that information and applying it. If your case is different and it's very effectively used metadata in GC Docs, you can get that information out, you can apply it, but we decided to simplify. As Megan mentioned, our architecture is flat. Every kind of island is a site and site collection. We don't have any subsites, we just go with one, and there is one library per site. But we can expand after that, and we've seen a lot of expansion. And the last piece is minimize your cutover risk. Our cutover was a big bang cutover. We had moved everything in the back end. It was synchronized, and we did our cutover via permissions. If you're looking to do something like that, reach out to me. I can give you some more specific lessons learned on how we did that cutover itself and how we would have done it given hindsight. But we had all of that in the back end, sitting there ready to go. And we only set GC Docs to read only. We did not shut down GC Docs and say, all right, day forward, figure it out. And we applied this this URL redirect. So you could navigate through GC Docs, click it, and it would show you the piece on the other side. And really that's about how do you kind of simplify that cutover and keep yourself in a position to be successful so that people might complain because they want to be in it or things aren't going well in the new system, but it doesn't mean they've lost access to data or lost the ability to do work in places like Teams and OneDrive and kind of continue that move. So that's sort of our larger things. We can do some rapid fire questions on the technical ones that are left if we want, or Eric, I'll let you kind of figure out how we want to handle this.
I am just, Eric, if you don't mind, just 2 things. Just one clarification. It doesn't mean there was no folders. So we do have a folder structures in place, just less. So less of like the duplication of like 2019 contracts 2019. So just cleaning it up a little bit. We've streamlined that a bit. And applying the ARM classification, you can do it at site level. You can do it like even like more so on documents as they come in. We're going to figure out how to do, again, the first part is really, we don't want to throw away all the work that we did in GC Docs on retention. We want to be able to translate that in and then leverage that work going forward so that we can utilize trainable classifiers and others. So we can look at some aspects of auto classification. So there are pieces that we're still working on there. So it's not complete, like it's flatter, but it's not completely flat. People still love their folders, but they are finding more use a lot of times out of metadata in ways they didn't before. So I do want to clarify that. And on the bilingual point, because that came up a lot, right. We don't have a third-party tool. This is going to be a bit of a change management as well for each of your teams, because I know a lot of groups that used to be like the -FR, -EN in a lot of files. The ability now for users to actually just change their language from English to French. We do try to use naming conventions. We do provide both when we create it so people can change their systems. But there is a certain element of users, and we have to continue to do this work with them to have them realize that, because it's somewhat new for some of them. But to actually put in the language on both and that they can work in both. So sometimes people still like that old system of like the -EN, the -FR. But there is a lot more we can do with that. We want to leverage it some more, but it is absolutely possible to utilize the bilingual English-French settings.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Megan and Graham.
So I am getting the sense a little bit from the community that there is like the need for like an AMA, like an Ask Me Anything from our technical team out there.
Yeah.
So I'll take this back a little bit and chat with Megan and Graham on how we want to sort of set something up like that maybe, and put some of these questions maybe on GC Exchange and host some dialogue there. So I'm just going to take that away. I don't want to, you know, every single little question. I think we're a bit surprised at just how deep you guys are into this and the types and the nature of the questions that you're asking. So I don't want to leave like everyone hanging, and an email transaction may not be sufficient. So we'll take that away and figure out if there's another way we could host that within the GC in terms of creating an opportunity for that type of sort of staff level discussion rather than every single department contacting us. But that's fantastic. I mean, it's fantastic. You guys are asking definitely the right questions. I'm some of these I don't even know the answers to. So I think it'll be important to host something like that. So I will take that away. And we'll have all the participants thanks to Orangutech. So we can reach out to you once we figure that out a little bit, as well as to share the presentations from today. So on that note, I just want to take a minute and thank Orangutech not only as being a partner in our delivery of M365. They happen to be one or a few of the resources we used along the way. They're also one of vendors in Ottawa that do offer some M365 tools that do interest us and may be of interest to some of you, but also for giving us the opportunity to reach so many people. And a chance to give my team a gold star. I mean, they really did quite a lot of work here, and have become quite knowledgeable in this. And I want to find the best ways to share that with the community. So a huge thank you to Orangutech and again to Microsoft for giving us that opportunities over the last month. Really quite appreciative of that chance. So, and thank you to everyone who participated today. I mean, we had at a high water mark about 163 people. So there's definitely some interest, and we'll keep the conversation going.
Awesome. Thank you, Danielle. The lift on TBS here has just been unbelievable. So thank you to your team, each and every one of you. The lift to pull off both an in-person and an online event is a lot of work. So thank you. And we're happy to facilitate these discussions and facilitate an AMA in the future, or work with you guys to see what the community's next needs are. So happy to facilitate that again in the future. No chance I get through all of these questions in a timely manner. We end up going really late. We're already 20 minutes late. So thank you everyone for the engagement. We will follow up and continue to the discussion. Again, you said, Danielle, GC Exchange is also a community where some of the questions can be asked and answered as well. So don't shy away from that, and feel free to reach out to Orangutech as well, as we work closely with TBS on their cloud journey. So again, thank you, Danielle and team. I appreciate all the time and effort and hard work that went into this. So thank you all. We will sign off, and we'll be following up via email, and you will see next steps on continuing the discussion. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.